What is real love? It's when you put someone's needs above your own. When you love somebody completely, you will do what for them, my friends? What? Anything. It's not tit for tat. It's not a measuring stick. It's not you did this and I did that. The minute you measure, the relationship is now a transaction. It is not a relationship.
And now I'd like to invite Mr. John Barron from the class of 1976 to come forward.
Good morning, everybody. As Father just said, I'm John Barron. I'm Vice Chair of the Fenwick Board. I'm also from the class of 1976, and I happen to be the father of 2 friars. Now, if that's not enough connections to Fenwick, I'm also proud to be the older brother of Bishop Robert Barron, who is this year's recipient of the Lumen Tranquillum Award. I'd like to take you back to the fall of 1973. My mom, who's sitting in the front row here, sent my brother and myself off on a chartered bus from Western Springs. It was then the beginning of my brother's freshman year at Fenwick. My classmate, Mr. Quinn, was on that bus, believe it or not. So after our arduous 45-minute journey to Fenwick, we arrived, and that arrival was also in many ways really the beginning, I think, of my brother's spiritual awakening. I'm sure he'll talk about that in a minute. The journey that began here for him has resulted in a very astonishing career. Bishop Barron, of course, was a longtime priest of the Archdiocese of Chicago. He served for a long time on the faculty and then as rector of Mundelein Seminary. And then in 2015, he was named an auxiliary bishop of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. He's perhaps best known as the founder of Word on Fire, a global digital ministry which serves as the avenue for his compelling preaching and evangelization. In 2011, Bishop Barron released the groundbreaking Catholicism series, which, as you know, is a 10-part video DVD showcase of the truth, beauty, and goodness of the Catholic faith. It has been viewed by millions around the world and is widely used in parishes and classrooms, including some of those here at Fenwick. Bishop Barron's focus has always been on evangelization, and by any measure, he's been phenomenally successful. He's the second most followed Catholic leader in the world on social media, behind only the Pope. His sermons are heard more times each week than by any priest in the English-speaking world. Each year, Bishop Barron's digital platforms reach over 25 million unique people. He has 1.7 million followers on Facebook, about 128,000 Twitter followers, and his YouTube videos have been viewed more than 33 million times. I could go on, and I could go on, but I think you get it. Students, ladies and gentlemen here, I am happy and very proud to introduce to you the winner of this year's Lumen Tranquillum Award, Bishop Robert Barron.
Wow, that's terrific. Thank you very much, everybody. And good morning. Yeah. I'm number 2 after the Pope, but I'm coming after him. Listen, I am really thrilled to be here. My brother mentioned that they wanted to give me this award. I jumped at the opportunity. I wanted to come back to Fenwick to see the place. Delighted to see all of you. Father, thank you for this tremendous honor. Thanks to the whole Board of Trustees. It means really the world to me. It's a very deep honor. But the greatest joy, and I really mean this, is to see all of you, to see the students here, and to sense firsthand the obvious spirit that animates this place, which is terrific. Hey, listen, you've heard a little bit about this already, but it's no exaggeration to say that my whole life changed. The whole direction for my life was set in this building in the spring of 1974 when I was a freshman. So my memory is that we were coming in from either gym class or some kind of recess period outside. It was a nice spring day. It was a bunch of sweaty guys, it was all guys in those days, coming into religion class in the afternoon. And it was taught by at that time, young friar called Father Thomas Paulson, whom I met, by the way, a few years ago. He's in St. Louis now, I think. But he was teaching the ordinary freshman religion class. And he laid out for us that day one of St. Thomas Aquinas's famous arguments for the existence of God. Now, mind you, I was a Catholic kid going to Mass on Sunday. My dear mother, who's here, took us every week, of course, to Sunday Mass. I didn't disbelieve in God, but I had never heard the case for God made in such a persuasive way. It never occurred to me that you could think about God in such a compelling and serious way. And it lit a sort of fire in my mind. Now, as I walked out that classroom that day in the spring of 1974, I didn't say, oh, I'm becoming a priest and someday I'll be a bishop and I'll be an evangelist. No, if you had asked me as I walked out of that classroom, what do you want to be when you grow up? I probably would have said, shortstop for the Cubs. Sox fans here? What are you guys? Of course, you all have recent memories of the world champion Chicago Cubs, don't you? Try rooting for 50 years for the Cubs, in my case, and then the year I'm sent to Los Angeles, they win the World Series. That was my experience. But when I was 14, by the way, could I have the freshmen stand? Let me see the freshmen here. There you are. You're all up there. Okay. No, good. Thank you. It's when I was your age, at your stage of life, right here at Fenwick, that everything changed for me. So you can sit down. Thanks. So when I walked out the classroom, I didn't say, boy, I know what my whole life's about. But in fact, that lecture that afternoon planted a seed. I went home, I remember, and anyone, by the way, from Western Springs here? Any Western Springs people? All right. It still stands, the Thomas Ford Memorial Library. Do you know what that is? It's the Western Springs, village library. I got on my 10-speed bike, I'm 14, and I drove up to the Thomas Ford Library. And I went looking for a book on Thomas Aquinas. I knew almost nothing about this figure except that I was fascinated by him. And I found this series of books called The Great Books, edited by Mortimer Adler. And there were two big volumes on Thomas Aquinas. So I grabbed one of them that had the arguments for God's existence. And I remember I took it down and I tucked it under my shirt. And then I rode home on my bike. Well, anyone who has read any of St. Thomas Aquinas knows he's famously dense and difficult and complicated, right? So imagine you're 14 and with no further instruction, really, I'm trying to make my way through this book. And it was strange and difficult and puzzling, but I wonder if some of you guys, I met some of the theater folks earlier, when you first read Shakespeare, in fact, I first came across Shakespeare here. We read Romeo and Juliet when I was a freshman. And that experience of, what is this all about, this text? I barely understand it, yet that sense of how wonderful it is that such a thing should exist. Do you know what I mean? Or when the science people, when you read Einstein for the first time, and you barely understand it, but it lights a fire in your mind. That's what it was like for me when I was 14. And I'm reading this rich and dense and complicated text, but it was feeding this hunger in me. Now, it was the seed that eventually grew into the vine, you might say, of the priesthood. And then my whole life, no kidding, has been determined very much from that first association with Thomas Aquinas. Almost all of my major academic work, my master's in philosophy, my license in theology, my doctorate in theology, I wrote on Thomas. Almost every book I've written has been either focused on him or containing large reference to him. I did my doctoral studies in Paris largely because, and it was Cardinal Joseph Bernardin who sent me for studies, and he said, "Where do you want to go?" And I said, "I want to go to Paris." And he said, "Why Paris?" And I said, "Because it's Thomas Aquinas' city." Thomas Aquinas has followed me all through my life and in many ways determined the path that I've walked. It all began on that spring day at Fenwick High School. Then in 2015, when I became a bishop, bishops have to choose a motto, right, that we put on this, coat of arms. You have to have a little saying. Well, I knew exactly what I wanted. I chose a motto from St. Thomas. The Latin is non nisi te domine. Any Latin students here? It's a little, that's good. I began my Latin studies here with the great Father Wren. You guys don't remember him, but maybe Father remembers him. Legendary Latin teacher. Non nisi te domine is a little bit tricky in Latin, but it means nothing except you, Lord. And here's the story behind it. So St. Thomas, the end of his life, is working on the last part of the Summa Theologiae, his great masterpiece of theology. And he's unsure of whether he's done justice to the great theme of the Eucharist. So he dramatically places the text at the foot of the cross, as though asking for judgment. And the story has it that a voice came from the cross, and of course Jesus spoke Latin to Thomas Aquinas, and he said, "Bene scripsistide me, Thoma." Well have you written of me, Thomas. What would you have as a reward? Now, can I just suggest to everybody in this room, especially the students, but everybody, that's a very interesting little spiritual exercise, is to imagine the Lord Jesus Christ standing in front of you right now and asking, what do you want? What do you want? I'll give it to you. Whatever you ask for, I'll give it to you. What would you say? Now, most of us sinners would say some version of, and Thomas Aquinas knew this. He said, the four great substitutes for God are wealth, pleasure, honor, and power. And think about it. Go through history, look around you. That's what people tend to seek. Some version of those four things. Oh, I'm not happy, but if I had enough wealth, I'd be happy. Oh, I know I'm not happy, but it's because I don't have enough pleasure in my life. I'm not happy because I don't have enough power in my life. I don't have enough honor and fame in my life. Every song you listen to, practically every movie you watch, practically every commercial you listen to, it's everywhere in the ambient culture, trying to convince us that one of those four things will make us happy. Wealth will make you wealthy. It will not make you happy. Honor will make you honored. It will not make you happy. Power will make you powerful. It will not make you happy. Why? Because the human soul, everybody, is wired for God. See, and we know it, don't we? Precisely when we experience these good things, but we don't feel satisfied. No matter how much wealth you acquire, it's not enough, is it? It doesn't satisfy the aching of the heart. No matter how much they honor you, it doesn't quell that deep hunger in you. No matter how much power you might wield, you're still left wanting more. Why? Because you're wired for God. You're wired for God. St. Augustine said it, didn't he? Lord, you made us for yourself, and therefore our heart is restless till it rests in you. Well, who is God? Who is God? God is love, right? Now, there's your formula. And if forget everything I've said today, but remember this, I'll be happy. If 50 years from now you say, that old bishop said something I've never forgotten, remember this part of it. If you want to be happy, order your life toward love. Make love, which is what God is, the center of your life. And when you do that, listen, you'll know what to do with wealth when you acquire it. The wealth won't turn on you. You won't become addicted to it. It won't destroy you. You'll know what to do with it. If you give your life to love, you'll know what to do with honor when it comes to you. If you give your life to love, you'll know what to do with the power that you might acquire. Some of you will become probably very wealthy in the course of your life. Terrific. Nothing wrong with that. Some of you might wield someday great power in the world of business or finance or politics. Good. Nothing wrong with that. Some of you will be greatly honored. Good. Thomas Aquinas said, honor is the flag of virtue. Nothing wrong with honor. But if and only if you have given your life radically over to love, to the love that God is, then you'll find joy. So, throw away, if you want, all the self-help books. Throw away Oprah's latest book. I mean that seriously. You want to know how to be happy? It's in that little formula of what St. Thomas Aquinas said to Christ. Non nisi te domine. I won't have wealth. I know you can give me all the wealth I'd ever want. I don't want that. I know you could give me all the power in the world, but I don't want that. I know you could make me the most famous person on the planet, but I don't want that. Non nisi te domine. I want nothing except you, Lord. That's what a saint sounds like. That's the saint that I discovered in the spring of 1974, right here, and that set me on a path that I've been walking, no kidding, till this very day. Let me give you the technical theological term for what happened to me that day. It's called grace. What's grace but an unmerited gift, right? It's an unmerited gift. Did I deserve what happened to me that day here at Fenwick High School? Did I anticipate it? Did I expect it? No way. As I came on that difficult bus trip my brother was talking about to get to Fenwick that day, did I have the slightest inkling that my whole life was going to change? No way. It came as a grace, an unmerited gift. Here's the whole of life, everybody, from the Catholic perspective. When grace comes, cooperate with it. You know what I'm saying? When grace comes, and we can't, grace comes unbidden. Grace comes in the most unexpected way. But when it comes, cooperate with it. Get on board with it. Ride it. And that's my advice, if you want, for you today. Because it happened to me here. And I don't know if it'll happen to you in the same way. Probably not. But something like it might. Be attentive. Keep your ears and your eyes and your hearts open to grace. And when grace comes, get on board with it. And remember, you want to be happy. Give the same answer to Christ that Thomas Aquinas did. Non nisi te domine. I'll have nothing, Lord, except you. God bless you, everybody. Thanks again.
Just a couple weeks ago, Cardinal Roger Echegaray died. Now, he might not be a household name. He was a French cardinal who had served the church in many capacities over the years, probably most famously serving John Paul II for many years. A great man, a very good man, a very holy man. You know, you might remember when Pope Benedict was accosted at St. Peter's, that woman came out and knocked him over. Remember that? and as he was coming up the aisle. Well, right behind him was Cardinal Echegaray, who was actually quite injured during that attack. Anyway, I had the privilege of meeting him at Mundelein Seminary many years ago. He came to address the students, and I had just gotten back from my studies in Paris at that point, and his English wasn't that good, but he wanted to address the students, so I did a translation for him. But you know what didn't need translating was his attitude and his smile. I mean, he was just full of joy and the Holy Spirit. But actually, I laid eyes on him a few years before that, before I met him. And it was in 1991 at Notre Dame Cathedral. The great Jesuit theologian Henri de Lubac, who by that time was a cardinal of the church, died. And I was a doctoral student at the time, living in Paris. I thought, well, I'll just wander down and see how close I can get, to the funeral. So I went up to the door at Notre Dame, and I was stopped by a man who said, "Est-ce que vous êtes membre de la famille? Are you a member of the family?" I said, "No." And he said, "Est-ce que vous êtes théologien? Are you a theologian?" And I thought, well, why not? So I said, "Oui." At which point he ushered me in to the cathedral and put me in a very good seat. I remember up near the front. In comes de Lubac's very simple coffin, and it was topped by his red cardinal's biretta. And I remember the deepest bells, they're rarely chimed at Notre Dame, they began to toll, this deep, resonant tolling. Well, at one point in the ceremony, up gets Cardinal Echegaray, who was there representing John Paul II to pay tribute to de Lubac, right? So he first told this story. He said, back right after John Paul was elected, he came to France and to Paris, and he came to the Institut Catholique, that's my alma mater, and he was addressing French intellectuals there. He was in the courtyard, gave his little speech, surrounded by all these French, scholars. At which point he said, "Où est le Père de Lubac?" Where is Father de Lubac? Now, see, Wojtyła knew him from Vatican II. They were there together, and they worked on Gaudium et Spes, the great statement on the church in the modern world. So Wojtyła knew de Lubac personally. Où est le Père de Lubac? Where is he? And then at that point, de Lubac stepped out from the crowd, and then Echegaray told us, John Paul II bowed to him like this. And they said, I'll never forget it, he said, "Encore une fois, au nom du pape, j'incline la tête devant le Père de Lubac." So once more, in the name of the Pope, I bow my head before Père de Lubac. And then he bowed to the coffin, Very beautiful, very moving. But I will say, it's much more than just a charming story. Because the relationship between John Paul and de Lubac is very telling, and actually tells us a lot about the state of theology today and where we are in terms of many arguments going on in the church. So let me tell that story a bit. So Henri de Lubac, French Jesuit, scholar of the Church Fathers, scholar of St. Thomas Aquinas, scholar of the liturgy, etc., is one of the great founders of what's called la nouvelle théologie, the new theology. What was that? It was a reaction against the sort of hyper-rationalistic, very deductive, ahistorical, somewhat culturally defensive Thomism that was in vogue in the first half of the 20th century. De Lubac and his colleagues represented a turn to the Bible, a turn to the Church Fathers, I'd say a more culturally generous reading of Thomas Aquinas, a greater openness to an ecumenical conversation, all of that. Which is why their point of view was called at first disparagingly la nouvelle théologie, this new theology. Okay, things got so bad in the 1950s that Henri de Lubac, great scholar, was silenced for 10 years. Extraordinary. And I think of it now because I'm much more minor key, but I'm someone that teaches and writes and speaks. For 10 years, at the height of his powers, when he was at the height of his career, he couldn't write, he couldn't speak, he couldn't teach. So that's how de Lubac was persecuted, if you want, by the sort of conservative establishment before the council. Okay, John the 23rd is elected, right, 1958. Council's called. De Lubac is rehabilitated, along with many of his other colleagues, and they're brought to the fore at Vatican II. And de Lubac is arguably the most important of the periti, of the theological experts at Vatican II. As I say, played a key role in Gaudium et Spes, Lumen Gentium, many other of the documents. So de Lubac has he's rehabilitated. He's back in the sun. Now, right after the council ends 1965, almost immediately, the victorious party, because de Lubac's point of view carried the day at Vatican II, it's fair to say. But the victorious party almost immediately split then into a more liberal reading and a more conservative reading. Think of people like Hans Küng or Edward Schielebeck or Karl Rahner would represent a more liberal reading of Vatican II that was very interested in the culture dialogue, even to the point of accommodating the culture, that was looking for Vatican III or Vatican IV before Vatican II was even implemented. Well, because of that, Henri de Lubac, mind you, persecuted by the conservative church before the council. I mean, no friend of reactionary Catholic conservatism. But along with Joseph Ratzinger and Hans Urs von Balthasar, he splits with the liberals and forms another school. The liberal school is associated with the journal called Concilium, right? The Council. And let's perpetuate the spirit of the council. The critics, de Lubac and others, founded a journal called Communio, right? Communion, that they saw as an alternative to Concilium. It was another theological path. Now, watch. Not preconciliar conservatism. That persecuted de Lubac. He broke with that. He was opposed to it. But not post-conciliar liberalism, but rather a kind of middle path between the two. Now, 1978, Karol Wojtyła, friend of de Lubac, friend of Ratzinger, friend of Balthasar, is elected Pope John Paul II. What does he do? And I think it's a key way to interpret John Paul II, is he walks the communal path. Was John Paul II calling for a revival of preconciliar conservatism? No, it seems to me. You imagine a preconciliar conservative watching the new Pope, bowing his head before a man who'd been silenced for 10 years. Think about that. People think, oh, John Paul, arch-conservative. He's bowing his head before this de Lubac. But John Paul II was also very much at odds with a post-conciliar liberalism that was too culturally accommodating, that was, he thought, giving away too much of the substance of classical Christianity. What he liked was this middle path, this communal path. Now watch something. Whom does he elevate? Well, he makes Joseph Ratzinger his head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. He makes a cardinal out of Hans Urs von Balthasar, and he makes a cardinal out of Henri de Lubac. The three great figures of this Nouvelle Théologie communal movement, and that represents the John Paul II stream, it seems to me. Now, here's why I say that little story about John Paul bowing his head before de Lubac is interesting today, because I would argue descendants of both the post-conciliar liberal tradition and the preconciliar conservative tradition are alive and well today. They're still on the scene today. Now, I'll speak for myself. My theological perspective in my writing and in my public work has been very much conditioned by the communio stream. That's the school that I would identify with. One reason, by the way, that I get sniped at by both the left and the right, just as de Lubac was, just as John Paul II was, just as Ratzinger was, just as Balthasar was, because they're not preconciliar conservatives, but they're not post-conciliar liberals either. It's this communio path. So it seems to me, if I'll use this maybe jargon term now, but if the de Lubac option could be re-explored, by which I mean an approach that is deeply Catholic, grounded in Scripture, grounded in the Church Fathers, deeply aware of St. Thomas Aquinas, the common doctor, but in a culturally generous way, in an ecumenically open way, not caving into the culture, but entering into willing dialogue with it. Not caving into Protestantism, but open to a conversation with it. It seems to me that's still the most reasonable theological path to walk, and the one that I've tried to walk. And it comes to mind when we think again of John Paul II, j'incline la tête devant le Père de Lubac. I bow my head before Père de Lubac.